back. I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Review, where we use our AI DesignEye to have a look at a previous competition piece of mine and give us an analysis based on the principles and elements of design, which is how we are judged in competitions, and also some suggestions for improving the design. This design was a parallel design, so a defined design style in this country, and the title was Indigenous. We were also constrained to only use Australian native flora in the design. So here you can see I have the rectangular container that is predominantly used for a parallel design. It helps you to think about the parallel lines in a design. And this is a formal parallel in that there's nothing overhangs the edge for this competition's definitions. And so what I've used there is one of those plastic garden troughs, sometimes window boxes, I think they're called as well. And I've covered it in melaleuca bark, so paper bark, so it strips. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it strips itself into nice thin layers so that you can wrap it around most containers. I have used gumtree off-chip bark chips in the base to cover the foam. These were the days where we used foam. That's from some time ago. It's from about 8 years ago, this design. And it's interesting too now because we know that Australian native flora never really did particularly well in floral foam, so it was lucky that the fresh components of this design were only on display for a day, so it was fine for the day. What I've used there in terms of the floral material, green leaf is from Dorianthus excelsa, which is known commonly here as the Gymea lily. Massive plant. The flower spike can grow up to 3 or 4 metres tall, and the leaves themselves are often over 2 metres tall, so they're great leaves to use to split up and move around. So just a single one of those. There are some grevillea flowers in the front of that, that's the red ones. There's Banksia cones, 2 different kinds of Banksia, and at the back there's some flower spikes from the Xanthorrhea, so a grass tree. These are dried, so they're naturally dried materials. When the flowers have finished, the flowers are white, tiny white flowers, massed colour on them when they're in flower, but they're also very green and very soft at that point. So when they dry off and the flowers die off and the seed pods open, they're much more usable in our arrangements. This design placed second in the competition, and I was very happy with that because at that stage it was one of the very first traditional defined design styles that I had attempted in this very large competition that it was in, and it was internationally judged, so I felt like I had done all of the things that I should have done at the time that I thought I could do with the design. So, sorry about my voice. I'm interested in seeing what the analysis is now. I know by looking at it what things are missing or could be enhanced a little bit further. But I'll be interested to see as we go through what the actual analysis is against those principles and elements of design. So let's have a look at that now. So line, first of all, strong vertical lines are successfully established using grass tree spikes, Gymea foliage and Banksia elements. They communicate clear separation between the components. So one of the things that you need in a parallel design is use that negative space really well. So I've gone for some very straight, very vertical lines, but softened it with the Banksias by broadening it out a bit, and then softened it even further by using the grevillea flowers, which are vertical by nature, but also have these little elements that stick out horizontally from the flower spike itself. Forms are individually strong and distinct. The verticality is true to the parallel style, and the use of a rectangular container reinforces the geometric clarity. Introducing variation in form, height, mass and proportion within the verticals by staggering or tiering the groupings would build more dynamic spatial tension and depth. And this is one of the most glaring improvements opportunities for improvement that there is in this design. It just doesn't vary the heights enough. I have tried to vary the heights, but if you look at the distance between the top of the Gymea leaf and the top of the first of the Banksias, there's way too much space there. And it detracts, it almost cuts the design in half, because you've got the two Banksias, the two grass tree spikes on one side, and then this Banksia at the front that sort of might be with the other group because it's lower down, or it might just be on its own. So, and even the distance between the top of the Gymea leaf and the top of the Grevilleas is too much. So that's very much something that I need to stagger or tier those groupings a little bit better than I have done in this particular design. Let's look at texture now. Excellent and authentic variety of textures. The furry Banksia cones, spiky Grevillea, smooth leaf blade, and uneven bark cover of the container offer pleasing contrast. The textures are clustered well, but one more fine texture or light material could bring contrast to the dominant bold forms. And that's very true. They are all very dominant forms, all of them. Even though the Grevillea's got a little bit of airiness around it, it's still a very dominant form, and the dominance is enhanced by the fact that it's red as well. So I think that perhaps, even if I had repeated the paperbark, the Melaleuca that I've used on the container, if I had somehow had a branch of that I could have put at the back of the design, because you really shouldn't be manipulating anything in this style of design, so I couldn't wrap it around another of the grass tree spikes or that sort of thing. It would have to be there on its own in its more or less natural state, so I'd have to look for a branch or a section of a branch that I could put somewhere in the design, or another piece of bark. So the darker bark that I've got covering the oasis, if I had a piece of that somewhere that was, because the colour, I'm just thinking aloud, the colour would be in between the colour of the grass tree spikes and the colour of the Banksias, the orange Banksias, and so it would blend in terms of the colour. It would be a different texture because it's a much smoother texture, although it has a roughness look to it. It's not spiky, or it's not furry the way the other textures are in this design at the moment. So colour. Restrained earthy palette is fitting for the theme of Indigenous. The red Grevillea provides a pleasing colour accent. A small repeat of the red elsewhere would enhance rhythm and unity. Currently the colour emphasis is slightly right weighted, so it's the colour, as I said, in terms of its dominance, you see that red colour, but it's only in that one spot, even though there's two sections of the flower there, there's one low down and one higher up. It's just not enough. I need more of a cluster there to balance it and to remind people about the colour. The other thing I could have done with the Gymea lily, had it been at a time where that flower was out, it is a beautiful red flower and you can separate out the individual parts of it, and I could have had that somewhere else, or a red bottle brush, which is nice and vertical by its nature, and had it on the other side of the design or somewhere else to repeat it, but not overemphasize the colour within the design. So space, good clarity between each element, respecting negative space and allowing each vertical to breathe. And that's exactly what you want in a formal parallel design. I think there's probably a bit too much space between the Gymea leaf and the grass tree spikes. And so, as we talked about in terms of staggering the heights, I'd like to see something else there that still enhanced the design, but brought it together a little bit more than it is at the moment. There's probably a bit too much space there for my liking. Balance. Overall, the design is visually stable and symmetrical, which suits the parallel style. The right side feels slightly heavier due to the bold green leaf and the red Grevillea together. Balance could be improved by redistributing visual weight, adding a light repeat on the left. So exactly what I just said before, that it needs something to balance it out. And it's interesting that now that we split the design up into these principles and elements of design, we can see that changing one thing would help all of the design, all of those parts of the design that are not quite right. So it's a good thing to be able to analyse your design in this way, because often it will point to the one single thing that you need to change that will help all of the design across the board. So a rhythm now. Natural plant rhythm is apparent, particularly in the repeated cones and spikes. Greater contrast in heights or more rhythm through the shape and size variation, especially across the midplane, would enhance the flow. Once again, we're seeing that if I had done something with that section in terms of the contrasting heights, it's going to give it, and perhaps the contrasting colour in terms of the red, it's going to give it more rhythm and repetition, and so it's easier for us to flow visually through the design. Dominance. Vertical lines dominate appropriately, establishing the parallel concept clearly. Consider creating a stronger focal point, not necessarily a centre, but a lead element with extra visual interest, for example, a subtle grouping or a highlight. Now that's what I could have done with the grevillea. I could have, if I had, let me just think about it. If I put the two Banksias in front of the Gymea leaf and brought the grevilleas over to where the two Banksias are, but had more of them and had them in quite a massed grouping, so maybe 3 or 5, that would balance it out, and it would give it a focal point because that colour would be drawn there, but the rest of it would be nice and parallel and still within the confines of the design definition. Contrast now. Good contrast in texture and colour. The rigid versus soft and muted versus bright interplay is effective. A finer material, like a wispy grass or a bark fibre, could increase contrast in texture and scale. So just as we talked before about putting that branch in that was the melaleuca so we could see the bark on it, or the bark fibre, or using the bark fibre instead of the bark tips to cover the phone, using some sort of bark fibre that it was lighter, or wispy grass, as it says. And perhaps the wispy grass is the thing that could go in between the Gymea leaf and the grass tree spikes, because that would create some airiness. There's still going to be negative space around it because it's not a solid form the way the others are, and it's going to be a lighter colour, all those sorts of things. So that's something that definitely could be considered. Unity. All materials share a botanical and regional identity, making the design cohesive and appropriate to the theme. Repeating a linking material or colour across the forewidth could unify the parts more cohesively. So we've talked about that now over a couple of sections, and I think that that's probably the thing that I need to look at is having that, repeating the colour across it, because there's not enough repetition of one particular colour. There's really the only time you see colour repeated is in the two Banksias, so the two orange Banksias in separate places. So that does need to be looked at, and perhaps I needed to have a smaller section of, top section of the Gymea leaf over on the other side of the design, or in front of it even, just so that there was a bit more repetition of those colours. So let's now look at some suggestions for improvement. Repeat colour accents or lightweight material across the design for balance and cohesion. Introduce subtle height variation within the verticals for rhythm and energy. So both of those things we've talked about, and they can be combined. They're not separate things. So if I looked at the heights and looked at the lightweight material, just that we talked about the grasses, so that's going to give me a subtle height variation, and it's going to give me the lightweight material all in one thing that I put in the design. So it's not, where the suggestions come, it's not do this and then do this and then do this. It's look at all of the suggestions and see how they can be incorporated together to improve the design. What else have we got? Explore ways to visually connect the components at a low or mid level while preserving preserving negative space. So once again, I think the grasses, the wispy grasses, is going to help me with that, because I could have them at that right, the sort of mid-level, and have it repeated at a lower level, just in one corner. Consider including a quiet detail element, fine bark, seeding pods, etc., to enrich texture and narrative. It's an interesting suggestion, I guess, because in real life, not in the image, I know that there's seed pods or seeding pods in the grass tree spikes. I think that they're already there, but perhaps what I could have done is repeated that as the covering for the foam, so not have the bark chips there, because they're quite a dense material, but to have something that was a bit quieter in its description, and finish off the design that way. So there we have our analysis of the Indigenous design using Australian native flora in a parallel defined design style. I hope that that has given you a little bit of insight. There is another video I've got on a separate channel that looks at the difference between parallel designs and European influence designs, because sometimes they can be quite close. And if you're looking at designs that are defined, I'll put the link for the other video in the description of this one, so that you can have a look at that one as well. But for now, I do encourage you, as I always do, to upload your own designs and have them analysed to help you on your floral art journey. It's as easy as just going to the website and following the instructions there. I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Review.